All right, we are recording and we're going to jump right into part one of book 8. And just to kind of catch our listeners up, we finished up book 7, where Socrates and his interlocutors had just finished talking about really the education of the philosopher rulers. We talked about the various subjects that the philosopher rulers would ideally be put through, partly out of a selection process, but partly out of their own motivation, their own desire and natural tendency to pursue intellectual pursuits that pertain to the topics that we discussed. And then what happens here at the beginning of book 8 is that the discussion now jumps back to something that Socrates pretty cryptically hinted at back in book 6, when he was talking about the constitution of a city essentially being related to the nature of the individuals that make up that city. Mm-hmm. And he said that there were 4, I'll use the term, 4 imperfect forms of the city that you would want to try to avoid in the formulation of your perfect republic. And so in book 8, Socrates now begins to explain the 4 imperfect cities. These are prototypes or archetypes that Socrates is going to describe to his interlocutors for the purpose of answering the very initial question that was posed at the challenge that Thrasymachus made, which is, it is better to be unjust and to appear just at the same time. And so remember, Socrates through this whole discussion is trying to explain, no, it is better to be just, but we have to come up with analogies to help answer that question. And so what we're going to do is blow up the perfectly just city, maximize that, see how that city works, and then shrink down to the individual level and see if the individual in that city is actually happy, is actually better off. But now there's a point of contrast here that needs to be made, which is that, okay, if we've built the perfect city and talked about the natures of the perfect citizens in that perfect city and how they reach a state of harmony, well, now we need to actually complete the proof. We need to now contrast it and compare it to citizens of the imperfect cities. And so now Socrates talks about 4 archetypes, 4 imperfect states that he categorizes as timocracies, which we will get into, oligarchies, which we will get into in this episode. And in the next episode, we'll talk about the other 2 forms, which is democracy and tyranny. Mm-hmm. And the reason he's doing this is because, as I said earlier, he's going to now provide descriptions of these imperfect cities in terms of their constitution, and then shrink down to the individual level of these imperfect cities. And now you sort of have a way of comparing, all right, well, the citizen who's in the just city who is also just, the city is just because the individual is just, and the individual is just because the city is just, right? There's this interplay between citizen and constitution and city. And so now he's going to do that for these imperfect societies. And so this is a very interesting chapter because as I read it, it's hard not to find applications and reflections in our current political environment in these readings even now. And so I think for that reason, this is obviously a very influential book as it pertains to politics. Mm-hmm. And I guess we'll get right into it. And so the first thing I guess the listener and reader of the Republic should understand is that at least in our translation, there's a term introduced that I don't think we've encountered before, but Socrates uses the term aristocracy to describe essentially the ideal state, the republic that they've built. And so, aristocracy probably has connotations now to the average person that has more to do with things like monarchies and leadership systems where it's all basically family or blood related, but that's not what they're getting at here. What the term aristocracy here means that you have a society where you have a soundly selected philosopher ruler who is now directing directing the harmonious city. And so they just use the term aristocracy to describe that particular situation, not because they're advocating a king per se for its own sake. I mean, this would be the perfect city would basically have a rational and merit-based selection criteria for the ruler. So leading in to the first discussion about Timocracy, I guess we should describe that, because that's actually a term that I wasn't familiar with until I'd read this. But a timocracy is essentially a city or society that values honor above everything else. That is sort of the main, how would I put it? It's the main, in a way, currency of that city. It's what people aspire to in that city. So in the harmonious city, what people aspire to is, well, justice, the harmony of the city itself. And here Socrates talks about how changes can happen in that quote unquote perfect city that can lead to the emergence of something called a timocracy. And the discussion leads into this idea that really all states of being eventually decay, even in the perfect society. And timocracy represents the result of a particular type of decay that can happen even in the perfect city. And that's one where you have a group that develops within the perfect city, a group basically that adheres to a slightly different mindset, one that moves away from the harmony of the city as a whole, and more toward, I guess the term that I'll use is social currency. Like social status suddenly becomes the primary motivator for activity in that city, right? And so keeping that in terms of the metals, the myth of the metals, you could see what happens there. In order for that to happen, you have people who are now trying to bounce out of their category, right? They're trying to bounce out of, whether they're gold or whether they're silver or iron, bronze. What's happening is that now there's this sort of ambition that's been injected into the system that wasn't there before. And that can lead people toward the desire to accumulate social status. And the moment that happens to a significant degree, you now have what Socrates describes as a faction that has formed within the city, right? Because if you have a city that's perfectly harmonious and perfectly unified, there's no factions, right? There's just the city, right? And everybody doing what they're supposed to do. But when that changes, now you have a group within a group. And within that contrast, you now have room for decay. You now have room for things to change in a different direction. And in this case, in the case of timocracy, a negative direction. Right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's I
mean, we need to talk more about timocracy, but that's kind of the general idea, right?
Yeah, it's just very, thought-provoking. Some of the things that he talks about, very sobering, in fact. He talks about the aristocracy where everything is shared, and there is this sense of this oneness. There's no separation between the citizenry and the guardianship and the ruling element. It's all one.
And above that, all one in terms of like the children are shared, the wives are shared. I mean, this is like a total unity.
Right. We discussed
that. I bring that point up just to say, yes, in fact, that was one of the things that Socrates said, is that everybody's working toward the same goal. In fact, all the goal of the entire city is assumed. Everybody is around the same.
That's right.
Right.
Right. There was a passage before that talked about wisdom inside the city, courage inside the city, temperance inside the city, and how once you have wisdom, courage, and temperance across all the citizens, you have justice in the city.
Right.
Now, but it's a very tenuous situation because there's so many things that need to go right. For how long? That cannot happen for eternity. And every system generates some waste. Something is generated. No matter how beautiful the system is, something is left. There's a remainder. Unless you have a perfect number every time. And there is this concept of the human number that Plato talks about. And if perfect order is not maintained, there is a remainder. And whatever, no matter how small that remainder is, it will keep accumulating over time and it will change the system slightly. Unless you hit perfection every time. So, my math is terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I would
have not made a very good guardian.
I was...
Can you talk about this Plato's human number?
Yeah, so basically, yeah. So the discussion is about, maintaining harmony in the state and then understanding how disharmony or disunion, faction forming happens within the city, the state. And Plato, being the mathematician that he is, goes down a rabbit trail in the middle of this discussion. And it's actually very complicated. I'm almost tempted to read this just so that the listener can understand how complex this section is. I'll read it very briefly, but not so that the listener can follow this per se, although you're welcome to try. But I mostly just to kind of illustrate how complex this is, and then we'll kind of summarize what he's getting at. So, but again, in terms of like the perfect number, the geometrical number for human births to maintain harmony in the city, the quote is this: it's now, for the birth of a divine creature, there is a cycle comprehended by a perfect number, while for a human being, it is the first number in which are found increases involving both roots and powers, comprehending 3 intervals and 4 terms of factors that cause likeness and unlikeness, cause increase and decrease, and make all things mutually agreeable and rational in their relations to one another. Of these factors, the base ones, 4 in relation to 3, together with 5, give 2 harmonies when thrice increased. One is a square, so many times 100. The other is equal length one way, but oblong. One of its sides are 100 squares of the rational diameter of 5, each diminished by 1, or alternatively 100 squares of the irrational diameter, each diminished by 2. The other side are 100 cubes of 3, and this whole geometrical number controls better or worse births.
I did that math very quickly. It came to 12,960.
Right. So I did go down this bunny trail, and I actually did a little bit of research, and I found just one YouTube video where a mathematician actually does the math and explains what really Plato's getting at is that there's a unique aspect to the number 12,960, which is it has a it can be divided in many ways, in many symmetrical ways. And even when you divide that number in uneven ways, there's still sort of an appealing symmetry to the way that number is divided. And so this ends up being a brief mathematical exposition of the Republic, simply to say that, well, all right, practically speaking, this is how the population growth should be monitored. But the larger point that they're getting at, though, is that asymmetry or imbalance in the system leads to decay.
That's correct.
Right?
And that's the point here, right? Like, unlike a math, which is very objective, human life is anything but. Like, there's a lot of subjectivity to it, and things can change. And
math is intelligible, right? Math is one of those things, right? That's on the divided line.
Correct.
Socrates, Plato in particular, would put math on that far end, right? Closest to the truth. Right.
But not all the way there too, because, but anyway, we digress. My point is that there is a remainder in this equation. If this equation doesn't lead to this exact 12,960, you're left with a remainder. That remainder is kind of a waste or a byproduct of the system that now makes it an imperfect system, and that accumulates over time. So he says this, since everything that comes to be must decay, this perfect aristocracy, this 12,960 over many, many cycles will decay. And now there'll be change. And that change will be very small initially. It'll look just like an aristocracy on the outside. But on the inside, things are happening. And so the thing that ties together an aristocracy, the philosopher king is tied to the people, is through the guardians. And it is the change that happens in the guardians that leads to the change from an aristocracy to timocracy. And the change is actually not that, it's not a very significant, it's not a very big change. Because what one is asking of the guardians to do is a very honorable thing. It's very easily one can see how guardians could be very honorable. That the masses, the citizenry will look up to the guardians as honorable people, right? And the reason why it's so easy for us to think of it that way is because that's the kind of society that we aspire to live in, an honor society, where yes, if you do certain things, you should be honored for it. You should be lauded for it. You should be given money and power and influence for it because that's honor. But that is furthest removed from an aristocracy.
Right.
The reason why someone does something inside of an aristocracy is for no other reason but for the fact that that's the right thing to do. And so one doesn't look at it from the standpoint of, oh my gosh, the guardians are so important, but why do they live in barracks and have no material wealth for their own? How come they're living so simply? That's not right. They should be honored. They should be, they should be given things and wealth and stuff should be bestowed upon them. Well, inside of an aristocracy, that way of applauding the guardians, of giving them honor, would create honorable and the not so honorable. And that creates from a non-dualistic, unified society to a society that is now has a schism of honor and not honorable. And that is the first problem. And that's the remainder of the 12,960.
Right. And it's because a subtle shift has been made, right?
Correct.
And it's important to point out that to be worthy of, to do something worthy of honor and to receive honor are two totally different things, right?
Correct.
That's the whole point. Because in the perfect city, in the just city, doing the right thing is its own reward.
Correct.
Right? But you could see it's just a very simple half step away from that to where you could smudge your aims. And now doing the right thing, maybe now the only way you know you're doing the right thing is if you do get honor.
Correct.
If you get honored. And now all of a sudden it's the honor you're seeking.
That's right.
And not doing the right thing. And now there's been this migration, this mission creep has come in. And what happens now is you could easily extrapolate from that point that now all of a sudden honor seeking becomes its own self-fulfilling or self-reinforcing aim. And when that happens, what you've done, maybe not totally with full awareness, is you've started to look for social status. You started to look for power and influence as your main goal and not so much doing the right thing.
Perfectly said. What happens in aristocracy is the guardians do their job, what they're supposed to, because that's the right thing to do.
Right.
Because that's what is the best thing for the citizenry to do. We are all one organism and everything is being done for that one organism. What happens in the timocracy is the guardians do what they do because they want to be honored. They're not doing it because it's the right thing to do. They're doing it because it leads to honor. So the question is, what is the right thing? Honor is the right thing, as opposed to the right thing is the right thing. Right. You know what I mean? So and Socrates says this, the first thing they start doing, the guardians, is they will stop paying attention to the most important, not the most important, but they stop paying attention to us. The guardians will stop paying attention to us, and they start paying attention to honor. So it starts very simply, but what happens is that the worker class right? Inside of the republic, there are things to be produced, trade to be done, life to be lived, and that requires production of things and exchange of money and things like that. Inside of an aristocracy, only it's just enough. That work is just enough, and the money that's created is just enough to be able to fortify the walls, to to be able to feed the populace, to go to war if need be. No opulence though. There's no opulence there. It's all temperance, right? But eventually, what happens is, because of this schism that's created, is honor loving, and accumulation of honor and that kind of thinking, that leads to the guardians focusing on instead of focusing on the welfare of the citizenry, that is the worker class, they start looking at what does the worker class have. And what they see is they have stuff. And now it becomes about, if we want honor, we also need to have the stuff. They start getting attracted to that stuff. In the past, that was that wasn't even in their minds. They were in the barracks. They were doing their exercises and whatever they needed to do.
Right.
But there was no looking at the citizenry to see how they were living.
Right.
Because citizenry took care of the guardians. Now the guardians are looking at citizenry to see how they're living, because they secretly have started now thinking, along with the honor, the accolades that you get from somebody, the thumping on the back, there's also gold and silver that they could probably have. They start desiring these things and start accumulating these things on the sly. They don't want to show it openly, but they start storing these in their storehouses away from their barracks. They actually start having their own places where it's hidden away now. They don't live in the barracks. They only for show live in the barracks. They actually have places, storehouses, where they're kind of storing this wealth, and they start to get a little bit more attracted to it. But having said that, they are not at a state where they are willing to commit injustices just so that they can hoard money. They are still honor seeking. That means they want to be seen doing the right thing. They don't want to be seen shamelessly spending money or having a lot of money. They still want to be seen as just and in the service of the city. So in that way, you won't be able to tell the difference between an aristocracy and democracy unless you look at the secrets that are being hidden. And so they will enjoy their pleasures in secret, running away from the law like boys from their father, since they've not been educated by persuasion but by force. And so they will neglect the true muse, the companion of discussion and philosophy, and honored physical training, and they'll honor physical training more than musical training. And so what he says is this kind of individual, this kind of guardian would start honoring, will be attracted to honor. That means they won't be attracted to reason, or they won't choose reason. They'll choose honor over reason. Why to do a thing? It's because it's the right thing to do, as opposed to why to do a thing because it's the honorable thing to do, are two different things. And they will start choosing physical exertion over musical training. And the reason why he brings this up is because it's the musical training that blunts the edges. It keeps the spirited element in check. And once you start giving up musical training for physical training, which is considered by the multitude to be of more honor, right? Stronger, faster, bigger. That's what we look at and say, that's what our guardian should be like. Who cares? We can play the lyre. Who cares about that? Or the flute. So but Socrates says it's reason plus musical training that makes the best guardian. And both of those go away in a democratic
There's a turning away from both of those
constitution,
back toward essentially to more, through the venue of honor seeking. It essentially opens the door into a slippery slope toward just a desire for money itself, right? Because really, what you can think of this is as you look at the Socratic description of the imperfect cities. And he does sort of describe them on a spectrum, right? So he's talking about, obviously we start with the just city, the aristocracy, and then that moves on to the Timocracy that we're talking about, and then to oligarchy, which we're talking about, and then democracy and tyranny. They're in a way sort of on a spectrum,
right,
in terms of their nearness to imperfection. But what's happening is there's just it's a severity of disunion that's happening. So with the aristocracy, there is no disunion by definition. It's a perfectly harmonious, just city. And then Timocracy is just sort of like that first foray into a sort of psychological monetization of the whole process. It is the emergence of social currency in the system, meaning, oh, yes, there's money, but when I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about social currency in terms of like status. Like if I do this, I will be honored. And that is the right thing to do because honor is what I'm seeking now within the framework of this just city. So now a faction is formed. And then if you keep taking that monetization process even further, it leads to oligarchy, which is sort of like, okay, this whole idea of like honor, that now has been totally scrapped for like the street level realpolitik version of status, which is just money.
Money. Well,
it's actually money.
Right. And this step, the democratic man or woman is getting there slowly.
Right.
Right now, it's a shameful thing. It's actually not honorable to hoard wealth, but they're attracted to it.
Right.
They see the power in it.
Right.
But they don't want to openly display it.
Right.
And so the way he describes a democratic constitution or democratic way of life is a Spartan way of life, like this, Laconia, Sparta, right? And if you were to think about Sparta, like what are the prototypical features of a Spartan civilization? This is exactly what it was about, right? It was honor loving,
the bare essentials, very regimented, militaristic,
physical training,
training.
And honor loving, like 300. It's a great example, right? It's all about honor, right? And the thing about Sparta was that this was the underlying the underlying story to Sparta was that even though in the open they could not show their wealth, it was considered to be shameful to show your wealth. As a matter of fact, their currency were not like coins; they were tablets. They were big and heavy because you had to really carry them around, and people would laugh at you if you were carrying that money. But those same people had inside their storehouses gold and silver and
secret
artifacts.
stashes.
They would travel the world and they would exchange things and get those things to keep. And inside the houses, inside their secret houses, because they're supposed to live in barracks too, and not really have possessions, but they would actually have possessions and all that. And that is the description here is of a Spartan society, honor-loving society. So the next order of business then is because we always discuss that the Republic is the ordering of an individual mind. Like how does this start happening inside of a human being? How does a democratic man come to be?
Yeah.
Because Socrates says this, that the constitution does not make the man makes the constitution. That means the people who form the republic form the constitution of the republic.
Right.
And so in order for democracy to be the constitution, a democratic man has to come to be. And so who is this democratic man? And so the way to look at this inside of us is that, there are this. Even if you were to do everything right, eventually you're going to come to a point where there's waste that's going to start forming. And if you don't deal with it the right way, if your mind is not ordered the right way to understand that this is what's going to create faction, this is what's going to create duality inside of you, where you're going to schism. Instead of pursuing reason, you're going to pursue honor. Simply doing the right thing as opposed to being acknowledged for doing the right thing are two very different things.
Yeah.
To the point that you had made, right? Like the argument with Thrasymachus is not that a just man would be happy. It would be that a man who is just and the world believes he is unjust would still be happier than a man who's unjust and the world believes he's just. And that's what's being described here.
Exactly.
The person who's just don't matter what the world thinks. We would like to believe that the guardian who lives inside of an aristocratic, constitution, we are unjust to that guardian because we pushed him back into the cave, even though he had seen the light. That guardian is living in the barracks. Everything is shared. He doesn't have any possessions. We are being unjust to that person, right? As opposed to this democratic guardian who has storehouses of wealth and people are lifting him up on the shoulders and walking around. That's a different. We would like to believe that is being just to the guardian, right? So, how does a democratic man come to form inside of this aristocracy? Is this schism that is created where there is an aristocratic father, philosopher king father, right? Now these are all thoughts, right? If we look at it from the standpoint of thoughts, there's this rational principle, the thought, ordered thinking, and one comes to see how that interacts with the world. What happens is one can have this ordered thinking, but the world doesn't understand the man. And there is friction that's created. But inside of the mind of that ordered being, the rational being, even though friction is created, one still wants to continue down the path of reason because they believe that is the right way to proceed. But they understand that there's a friction. People are complaining about them, about how the fact that there's no wealth to be accumulated, there's no honors to be sought. Why? Why are we living like this? Without getting any acclaim for this way of living. It's not an easy way of living either, right? And now you are bombarded with thoughts from the outside about how this way of living is foolishness. Nothing is being gained from this. No material wealth that's being accumulated. No one even knows that you are a rational individual with this beautifully ordered mind. How about you make that known to other people? Participate in the world and let them know that you are this person so you can get wealth and honor and stuff like that. And now as you're doing that, you get led away. So you leave the ordered republic and start seeking honor from without, right? But at the same time, you're not somebody who's shamelessly showing off their wealth. You still have noble pursuits. They seem like noble pursuits. I'm doing this for the betterment of the world, or whatever. Yes, the honor that I get while I do it is just part of this world. It's not that I want the honor, it's just I'm being given the honor. But secretly, you actually want the honor.
Right. That's sort of like when a politician goes to a disaster site and starts handing out sandwiches. Right? It's like, okay, do they really need you there?
And put this way, that politician is doing it because he wants votes.
That's what I'm saying. But it's the same.
There is no ordered republic there.
No, but it's the appearance of honor, right? Because they're doing an honorable thing,
right.
but they don't really need to be there, right? And so, so yeah, I mean, this analogy works really well for not only understanding the Thrasamachian position, which is that the best way to live is to appear just while actually being unjust. But I think it demonstrates a lot of things that happen at the individual level, right? Because if we talk about the republic being the republic of the mind, then what would be the timocracy of the mind? And I think as I reflect on my own life experience, I think I've probably been a timocrat most of my life. I mean, it's sort of a lot of what I do. Yeah, I mean, well, I have to qualify that. I'm of two minds on that question because I think a lot of people go into medicine because they're altruistic, because they want to help. There's some drive at that point. I mean, because I think my personal feeling is if you go into medicine purely for money, like absolutely purely for money, you're not going to do it. It's just too much work. And there's other better ways of making money. But I do think that most people who go into medicine want to make a contribution. There's an intuitive reach to this career path that's made from a foundation of altruism, which you could think of as sort of like they're standing on the pavement of the aristocracy at that point as they reach up toward, this career path. But what ends up happening though is, you get into medical school and people, what happens? People congratulate you. It's like the best thing, right? And then you have like this ceremony when you even start off at medical school. At least when I started off, there was this thing called the white coat ceremony where we all get our white coats. And it was like there was a band there and it was, right? It's sort of like it feels good to be honored in that way. And secretly, though, in my head, I'm like, I haven't even started. Like, we haven't even gone to class yet, and we're being praised. And I understand it's an accomplishment, but that's kind of the trap of the high achiever, right? It's sort of like you start off on a path, maybe because you want to make a contribution, or there's something you want to accomplish. There's some purpose that you may or may not be aware of that you're seeking. But then there's this sidetrack. You've been pulled out of the aristocracy in that process, and now it's the honor seeking that slowly takes its role, and it begins to influence your decision.
That's the other excellent analogy. Actually.
The other example that came to me as I was reading this is sort of like it's the problem that we have. Well, I used to have of saying yes to everything. Sort of like somebody asks you if you could do something, you're like, yeah, I'll do it. And you really don't want to, and you really probably don't have time to, but you don't want to look bad by saying no. And maybe a more frivolous example, but it's an example of that, where the rational decision many times is to say no, or I'll think about it, and I'll get back to you. Or sometimes a rational decision is just say no right out of the gate. But often what happens is that you start to say yes to certain things, not because you think it's the right thing for you to be doing, but there's a social currency to saying yes. If you're always there, if you're always available, and at the expense of your own time, of your own resources, you start making decisions that are not rational, and you make decisions that are more for the purpose of the accumulation of social currency. And I think those are all small, that's a smaller form of kind of Timocratic thinking.
I see what you're saying, and I think these are great analogies. I looked at it from a different standpoint now that I hear you talk about this. I looked at it as a very sobering statement that Socrates has made. It's almost like a warning that that one cannot rest at any point. One could come to understand this constant non-duality and have this very ordered mind, but eventually one is going to slip into democratic thinking. And I'm sure it happens to everybody. It's such a difficult thing to stay away from. Imagine this guru, right? Who has ordered their mind and is in absolute peace and has achieved like the pinnacle of what a human experience could be. And now suddenly everybody's flocking around this guy. Tell me the secret. Now, how does this person go about participating in this world without being attached to this honor component that he's getting, that he or she is not even asking for, is getting it? Eventually, when does that switch happen where you now have hundreds of thousands of followers and you are on you have your own podcast and or whatever, right? That person inside of their mind is still clinging on to the non-dualistic, virtuous justice element, but they have, unknown to anybody else, they wouldn't see it. It'll be just for that individual to know, where they're also now looking at the accolades and the honor that they're getting and how that can devolve themselves over time.
Yeah.
And if you're not careful, that can take you down the slippery slope of where now suddenly you have this ashram which is full of money and you're driving around in Mercedes Benzes and whatever, right? And then eventually it is the sex and all of that. This has happened. I'm not giving you a story that is
no. This is classic, right? And that's what's so great about reading this, is that what you're reading in these passages is story arcs that have repeated over and over and over in political history, which is like you have the ideal, right? You have the ideal leader, the ideal state, and then things devolve.
And then these folks, you're right, they devolve, and then they're like, oh, this guy was a fake from the get-go. It probably was not, and there's some dangerous cults and all of that. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about yes, he was just human. He just didn't hit the 12,960 number every time. You know what I mean? Had some waste form. Yeah. But what you were describing, though, I take a little bit of an exception to that, because in order for one to be democratic, one has to understand this non-duality concept, because they're constantly touching it, but they're being pulled away from it. They're always going back and touching it. You see, it's like a touchstone. They're like, there's honor that's pulling them to one side, but they are constantly going back and telling, no, this is right. This is the right thing to do. But the reason why this is the right thing to do is because it gives me honor. Oh, I'm getting pulled between these two things. That schism is being created in the Timocratic man. In my case, why did I go to medical school? Really, was I that altruistic? Wasn't there honor seeking? Let me put it this way, even inside of a tyranny, as we discuss it, we'll come to realize that the people believe that's the right thing to do. Even the democracy is the right thing to do. Even oligarchy is the right thing. The Timocratic man believes honor seeking is the right thing to do. That's, you know what I mean?
Right.
Just like the aristocratic society believes that the right thing to do is the right thing to do for its own sake.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. But I don't think there needs to be a full awareness of the aristocracy and the timocracy in order to be timocratic. And in fact, it's probably a lack of that awareness that is required for you to even veer into timocratic thinking. Because I think if by awareness of the well-ordered republic, we mean an understanding of it at the intelligible level, then you would never depart from it. And if you do depart from it, it just means that you didn't have the full intelligible awareness, understanding of the aristocratic state.
But you see, I think what he's trying to talk about is that it can happen. Because one could have complete understanding. It's just that because you have understanding and you have knowledge doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to stray away from it.
Yeah, and it brings
that is human nature.
I see what you're saying. And the other way to look at this, and this is fascinating discussion because these analogies are so multidimensional, but the other way to look at it is through the lens of warfare, right? And so if let's say, going back to the example of the guru who gets corrupted and, gets a Mercedes-Benz and becomes a pimp or whatever it was you were saying. So let's say they're in this aristocratic state, right? Of they have oneness of mind, they've achieved a level of peace, purpose, and fulfillment in life, and that sort of inadvertently gets recognized, and now they get accolades and attention from it. If they get the idea or the suggestion from a follower or an admirer that they should monetize what they're doing, then that's war. Okay, that's war, because your citizens are thoughts, and this is now a thought from another country. And now, basically, if your if your guardians are good, then, or if your guardians are in aligned with harmony, then they'll resist that, right? They will defend the border, and nothing will infect or corrupt. Or, though, if the temptation actually sinks in, though, and you say, why not? Why shouldn't I just do this? I'm going to help other people. There's this rationalization process, but it's not real rationalization. Or actually, it is rationalization, but what you're rationalizing is something that's not aligned with the apex principle. You're rationalizing something that's aligned with honor. And this sort of like, well, why shouldn't I do that? Now that's a civil war. Because now look what's happened at the thought level. You now have a faction of thoughts in your mind that they're going to be growingly and increasingly foreign. Yeah. And so basically it's a type of warfare.
Right. And if you think about it, that's the natural order of things in human life. Mm-hmm. Human life is complex. Yeah. And that's why a book like this, which is very logical, has to have this caveat. It makes sense here. Because this perfectly ordered republic cannot exist forever. Right. As a matter of fact, even if it exists for a second, it's existed for infinity, right? Mm-hmm. But even if it's come to be, it's going to go away. You see the paradox inside of it,
right?
Like if you've created the ordered republic, that means it did exist. If you created it, that means it can go away,
right?
So it is just the unfortunate nature of being human. But this is starting from pinnacle virtue and then taking a step down to timocracy. Mm-hmm. But the other way, looking at it from the other way, like where you have no idea of virtue, you're wallowing in the conventional life and your ignorance like a pig, mm-hmm. and you're looking up at life. When you look at yourself, in that state of just living a very conventional life, honor is something that comes very easily to a human being because it is what everyone is seeking. Now, when you say honor, the honor of a timocratic individual is honor at its most elevated state. You're being honored for like the pinnacle of human achievement. But there's honor at the other end. In a tyranny, there is honor as well. And when we are in that frame of mind where we are absolutely rebellious and, we are just hooking on to, the what we believe is the next best or greatest thing. We want to be like that or, whatever be that situation, which we find ourselves in young ages, like when you're in teenage years and, early 20s and stuff like that. That is, you're seeking honor, but it's a flawed honor. Right? And and then you realize that, okay, going to medical school is better than some of these other things that one can do. Why? Because the world says so. The reason why there is a white coat party is because people believe like these people are honorable. They should be honored for it. Right? And who are these people who believe so? They are people who don't have white coats on. You see what I mean?
Right, no, I see what you're saying.
The physician is looking at you and saying, "Oh, this is a medical student." He doesn't know nothing. But the people who are non-medical, background, these guys are looking at medical students going, "Oh, these guys are doctors already."
Right.
And so that is the honor that you're looking for. Yeah. It doesn't take long before you come to realize, "Oh my gosh, like this white coat ceremony means nothing. Like I'm in the trenches.
Right.
Like this is ridiculous.
This is where imposter syndrome.
Yeah, this is hell week, hell week, right? Like and so then you come to realize about that is that phase where you kind of get through training or whatever, and then it becomes about acquiring stuff for yourself. Like, how do I show that I'm successful? When I look around me, everybody is 10 years ago have done everything, right? Because they didn't go to medical school. Now here I am, I'm older and I have not any money, I have nothing. Now I need to really acquire the stuff to show that actually this life is worth it.
Yeah.
Eventually it does go to honor though. Like I think eventually once people get a lot of money, they've accumulated everything and they've lived their life, they've put money away for their kids' college or whatever, like physicians, you see them, right? Eventually they're looking for honorable positions. They want to be, the heads of societies, and that is a different kind of honor.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to look at concepts like authority and you're basically putting on the robes of authority. And it's interesting to think about, it's interesting to think about concept like authority, and it's interesting to think about concept like imposter syndrome through this lens of the Timocracy. But
you see what I mean? Like looking at the other way, right?
No, I understand
which is the human trajectory.
Right.
Because you could end in an honor-loving individual as well. But this is an individual who's gone through the stages of anarchy and democracy, oligarchy, acquiring, creating a sense of I am rich and these other people are not, to now because I have all this wealth, money, power, influence, honor me. Give me this title, give me this position.
Right.
You see? And that is very different from the person who comes to understand that none of this makes any difference in life. As a matter of fact, none of this makes you happy. The person who gets to the honor-seeking person who goes up this chain of democracy, of tyranny to democracy to oligarchy, comes to understand the nature of acquisition, the nature of human life is that you're not going to be happy. And then you find yourself in crisis. You find yourself in crisis moments at each of these points. As opposed to the aristocratic person, that's actually a situation where there is a creation of a schism inside of them, but there's no crisis there.
Right. Well, that's right. Yeah, you're bringing up another interesting point too, which is that, you can come at the realization of the importance of harmony and oneness both ways. As long as there's an introspective process that is thorough and robust, whether you're coming up from tyranny or descending down from aristocracy, you will eventually arrive at the same point. Because I think what happens is as you move up from tyranny, I see what you're saying, is that as you move up, you realize that none of these are fulfilling, and you arrive at the Timocracy, and you realize that even the honor and accolades are not fulfilling. There's something deeper that must be obtained. Well, that basically you've come up from the ground up. You've clawed your way up toward the aristocracy of that situation. And again, that would require an introspective mechanism that allows you to reach that point, right? And if you don't have it, well, then you just stay stuck in one of those stages. But then the other thing that happens too is like if you've not clawed, you see, here it is. If you've not earned that knowledge, and this is why I think Socrates talks about why education is so important. But if you've not earned that knowledge, if you just sort of like popped into the perfect city, and then now you're faced with either warfare thoughts from the outside or from within, and you have no experience to how to handle this information, and you decide to go down the path of decay, with a strong introspective mechanism, you will descend, and hopefully you would end up right back. But that's the same issue, though. We're talking about thoughts, but what happens at kind of a more political civilization type level is that when things go great, people forget how hard it was to get things so well. And so then they descend down. They go back down. There's a foray. But every empire has fallen for the exact same reasons, right? Because there's always a little bit of fraying at the edges of the founding principles. And if they're not curated, if they're not protected, if they're not adhered to through essentially education is what it boils down to, then people are going to say, why not? Yeah. And it's hard to argue with why not.
Yeah, there's institutional memory in a way, right? You pay the price to get to this understanding of this non-duality, this oneness, this perfect system. The good thing for us as humans is human life is finite, right? And you rather go through the ranks of tyranny and democracy, oligarchy, democracy, and then eventually come to this understanding that none of this matters, and what matters is justice and oneness and wisdom. And then you die. Great.
Just in time.
That's perfect, right? Like that's the, you're right. There is the chance that you're going to decay from there is a lot lower. If you come to this understanding in your 70s, great. I mean, your life is this present moment, right? There's a 70-year-old version of you and me who understands this and is happy, right? But in order for that person to get there, they have to have gone through this 40-year-old tyrannical, democratic, oligarchic, democratic man, right? But in case of a society, in case of a constitution, one could get there, but unfortunately, it's not the lifetime of the individual. There's going to be people born inside of those societies who didn't realize how they got there. And that is where the breakdown happens.
Right.
In the cycle of the universe, this is going to come up over and over again.
Right.
In the cycle of the mortal human being, you are lucky to find yourself going through crisis and getting to a point of peace. But having said that, I mean, this is aspirational stuff.
Right.
But most people get to this. If you're lucky, if you think about it, society says if you're lucky, you're going to be a democratic man. That means you're going to have honor. You're going to be seeking honor only for honor's sake. You won't be showing off your wealth. You'll be modest in the way you show your wealth. You'll have a lot of this treasure and people will be applauding you. That'll be the best life. But that's not like what would come to understand how hollow that life would be. You're still searching for things. Yeah. You're looking for honor from without and not from within. So very few people can make that transition. But once you do, none of this other stuff matters anymore.
There's something sublime about unrecognized virtue when you think about it. Like to imagine a person who had, perfect virtue. If you could imagine a person who had that, whether that's achievable or not, and the fact that they were not recognized is in complete alignment with their existential plan.
And wouldn't you?
It's sublime.
But wouldn't you in that situation, because one didn't understand it, say this person should be honored? Like, why you guys not honoring this person?
Right. And so maybe the right thing to do is to say we should all forget this person.
It's like Nietzsche's Übermensch. Yeah. The guy walks into town, and he's like the most knowledgeable person there, and nobody pays he pays no mind to this guy. Yeah. That's the right way to treat that person, actually, if you think about it.
This is where this is like you reach a point where like, wait a minute, like the right position here in terms of how you should think of these things intellectually can sometimes get kind of confusing. But I think at the very least, though, I can say that the Socratic pieces are all falling into place, though, because what we're talking about explains why Socrates was talking about why philosophers are ostracized, right? Because they're looking at things through an intelligible realm through an intelligible lens. And if, you basically if you transported a citizen of the perfect city, a citizen of the just republic, i.e. somebody who's like a philosopher, and then threw them into an oligarchic society, they're going to seem weird to oligarchic citizens, right? They're like, get out of here. Like, you don't make any sense, right?
Right.
Well, which, by the way,
I don't think we'll be able to get to oligarchy. I think we should probably...
we can end it here. We talk about oligarchy and democracy coming up.
But by each of these, there's a lot to discuss, honestly. I don't know if we should... I think we bit off a little bit more than we could chew. I don't think we can discuss, two of them at a time. I think...
We might need to do each one.
We might have to do each
one. But I do think that this format, which will no doubt follow in the subsequent episodes, is... Yes, so we will elaborate on how these constitutions form, starting from the aristocratic base, the ideal harmonious city as a base, how they devolve into these states, describe their constitutions, and then I think we'll just keep talking about how the nature of the individual of these cities, because again, the constitutions of these cities are really the emergent properties that result from its constituents' natures, basically the natures of the citizens that constitute the city. And then we'll talk about how, again, since we're interested in the Republic of the Mind, how the mindset version of these imperfect cities look, and understand that, at least for my part, I'm very much a citizen of... I probably have passports for many of these imperfect cities. I'm a well-honored citizen of the Timocratic society.
Well-traveled.
All right, we'll leave it there, and then we'll get into the oligarchy in the next one.
All right, thank you.